Thanks, Pat. A very good afternoon, good evening, good morning to all of you. We will just wait for a few more minutes so everyone can join in. So I'll start my presentation in a couple of minutes. Hello, everyone. We are just waiting for a couple more minutes so everyone can join in. Just one more minute and then I'll start the presentation. Okay. So first of all, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who has taken out time to join this webinar. So IAMC SWG on National Scenarios Committed and EUCD is hosting this webinar where Philip would be explaining about registration, submission of scenarios, and vetting of scenarios. Before he starts his presentation, I'll give a short brief on the IAMC SWG. So the purpose of this study, as everyone knows, we are building on the work that has been compiled under IPCC Working Group 3 AR6 Chapter 4. We plan to evaluate the gap between the current policies and the measures required to reach net zero. The main objectives of this first exercise under the SWG is to consolidate all the modeling exercises that are taking place across the world under national international projects. We are facilitating the discussion on national scenarios and coordinating the scenario intermodal comparisons at national level. And we are aiming to align the long-term strategies and net zero targets with the short-term policy measures. As anyone who's part of the IAMC SWG study knows that there are three main scenarios, the BAU, current policy, and net zero, that we are requesting all the modeling teams to submit. The process is simple. We have shared a list of scenario variables to the modeling teams who are participating in the study. After the initial data collection, we will have a vetting process. The compilation of the models as well as the scenario data is being hosted by IASA Scenario Explorer as a part of the cooperation agreement with the IAMC SWG on national scenarios. And we will have in the next, like we had an initial vetting process going on since May, and in the next 2 to 3 months, we'll have a proper vetting process going on for the scenarios that have been submitted. And just to give a brief, we've had more than 80 plus teams showing interest in the study, out of which more than 50% are familiar with the IAMC template. And of the teams, 70 plus have already given information for registration. 49 teams have already been added and notified to submit their scenarios to IIASA Scenario Explorer. There are still modeling teams that are being registered. So we have around 20 plus teams that's still in the process. Hopefully will be completed by this week or early next week. This is a tentative timeline. As you can see, for registration, the deadline is this week, June 7th, and the initial deadline for national scenarios is June 15th. And then we will have a final deadline by August 31st. And we would be presenting a little bit of the scenarios, the information over the past year at the IMC in South Korea between November 6th and 8th, and hopefully be able to draft the first paper and share it for review and feedback by end of this year. About the webinar for IAMC SWG project, it is mainly about registration and submission of scenarios, that is upload of scenarios to the Scenario Explorer. And for COMITTED and EUCD, it's about submission, the vetting process that takes place. And with this, I will basically give the floor to Philip to start his presentation. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Saritha. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I see that we have another 26 people online currently, which is very, very nice. I just before we start, I would like to keep this session quite interactive. So you will have a chat. You can ask questions at any time. There's my colleague David here as well, and then my colleague from the message modeling team, Oliver. And together with Saritha, they will try and address the questions as best they can as they come up. For the beginning, I will do a quick recap of the Scenario Explorer, sort of what it is, what you use it for. And for that, I will not take in questions. And then as soon as we get into the more applied side of things, sort of interacting with the user interface and stuff, then perhaps I can try to make the session more interactive and try and get all of your questions answered. Let me just quickly adjust my screen here, and then we can get started. So let me share my screen. You should now see my screen and can go. So this is, as Saritha said, this is for 3 projects. This workshop, it's for the National Modeling Study, it's for the EUCD project, as well as COMITTED. We'll be covering registration, data upload, and the vetting process. So just to go over the agenda, we'll have a quick recap. So this is for everyone who has seen one of these presentations before, or if you're not familiar with, I would quickly go over what exactly we're talking about, the Scenario Explorer, the data format, and how to get the data in an automated way, which can be quite useful. I will then go over how to register yourself, so how to register your user. Then after you register yourself, you register your model. You will then get to upload your data. And then finally, we will take a look at the vetting process. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of how to use it, what is the Scenario Explorer? Scenario Explorer is a web user interface. It's a platform for modeling teams to share their modeling results. And it's kind of a dual purpose tool because it can be used or it is used during a project internal phase when you develop scenarios and you share the results with your modeling colleagues and you analyze them. But then also once you are in a state where your scenarios and your modeling results are kind of up to standard, then you would probably want to publish them. So then we typically create the second Scenario Explorer, a public-facing one, where researchers, other researchers, policymakers, stakeholders, and the broad public can look at the data, can interact with them, and can hopefully build their own analyses on top. In the bottom left, you see small selection of some of the projects that this was part of, and the Scenario Explorer was initially developed for the 1.5 degree special report. So just to give you a bit of a better idea, this is what the Scenario Explorer looks like when you visit it. This is now, for this example, this is the NGFS Phase 4 Explorer. If you log in as a guest, which is the typical experience that you would do for a public-facing Scenario Explorer, we can kind of work our way down these sections here. The first thing that you see is what we call a workspace. A workspace is a combination of, it's a title, it's some description, and then it's a plot of some time series variable that an integrated assessment model produced. So in this case, we're looking at the GChem model, and it gives us an overview of sort of the broadly sort of the most important indicators for all of the different scenarios. So here we have the final energy demand, CO2 emissions, and sort of the population and GDP data that kind of underpin these scenarios. If you hover your mouse over, you can see that the different scenarios have different outcomes in final energy demand. And unsurprisingly, the low demand scenario is um, the lowest in terms of energy demand. And this is already kind of what we will see later for the vetting process, one of the quick sort of sanity checks that you could do. If we continue, we can go to the download section. So as the data is published, you will probably want to make it available for download. This is so that the people who want to take a look at the data, they can download it in bulk, and then as such, they can analyze it offline. So they can use Excel directly, they can use R, Python, or whatever kind of programming language or tool of their choice. We then go further. There's the documentation tab. In the documentation tab, you will have the various different dimensions that we report, and for each dimension, you have descriptions, and so you can take a look here. So, for example, for the downscaling model that we use, you can find a link here to the description. This is especially important when users and policymakers might want to look into your model more deeply, kind of the underlying assumptions and equations. This is where we would link the descriptions. Now, coming back to the workspace section, you can also create your own workspaces. As a guest, you can only temporarily create them. So if you create a free user account, then you can save your workspaces as well. Coming back to the presentation, the kind of the cornerstone of this whole model comparison studies is common data format. This is the first thing that we need to ensure to be able to compare our results, right? And so the Integrated Assessment Modeling Consortium developed a common standard. It's based on Microsoft Excel, and it is based around these 5 kind of index dimensions where you have model, scenario, region, variable, and unit. And then you have these yearly columns where you have these values for the time series then. If you're familiar with tabular data and the notion of a long versus a wide format, this could be considered a wide format. What's very important is that the format is relatively strict. So all of these columns, model, scenario, and so on and so forth, they are all required. In terms of the year, you can choose when you start. This is typically determined as part of the modeling protocol. But these 5, they are all, again, they're all required. I'm just stressing this so much because I've seen quite some uploads fail because there was some column missing, or there was some column there in addition. So it's also, with some special exceptions, not really allowed to modify this template in any way. There is a modification that we officially implemented. This was part of the Horizon 2020 project Open Entrance, and it is for sub-annual time resolution. This is mostly relevant for power systems modeling, where your demands are not really only dependent on the year, but it's also perhaps the time of the year. So if you're looking at heating or cooling, you can guess that a summer day or a winter day, a summer night or a winter night have very different energy demands. It's probably not relevant, but I still wanted to make sure to mention it here. Also, to make this perhaps somewhat abstract definition a little bit more concrete, let's look at an example of what such a data sheet could look like. I'll have to maybe no, never mind. So here I have an Excel file, so it's in the XLSX format, so the newer style XML-based format. We have our model column for our model A. We implement the business as usual scenario, and then we have a couple of regions, and then these variable unit combinations, and then we have the values for, in this case, just as an example, the years 2015 to 2040. One question that we had in the previous webinar already, which was quite a good one, is that you are allowed to mix model and scenarios within one sheet. In general, I would recommend that you put all of your data in the same sheet and that you only submit one sheet. It is technically possible to make it work, but the chance that our parsing system understands something wrong is quite high. So you create one Excel file with one sheet, and in this one sheet you put all of your modeling results. So in this case, if we implemented instead of business as usual, we implemented current policies, you would perhaps have your results in this way. Now coming back, the next kind of building block of this ecosystem is the PYAM package. The PYAM package is an open source Python package that we at IASA here are leading the development, but as we said, it is open source, and we have a lot of great community contributions. PYAM mainly has sort of three core pillars/use cases. It can be used for data processing, it can be used for validation, and it can be used for analysis and visualization. And so the first and the last one of those we will see later, as we will download data from a scenario explorer to then kind of perform a quick little vetting. Probably the best way to get started is to simply take a look at the docs, and there you can find all of the links. We have it's hosted on GitHub, so you can get to the GitHub repository. We also have a Slack channel where we try to be as quick as possible to respond to user questions. And PYAM has the documentation. There's a huge amount of time that went into this. It's under tutorials, and it's really nicely detailed instructions. So if you want to get started with this, I would recommend for you to start at the beginning. The first steps with the PYAM package is a great place to start. And then, as you can see by the different color here in the link, I've already clicked this a bunch of times. This is a very important one because it allows you to directly read the data from a IASA database, so from a scenario explorer, and then perform local aggregation or vetting or things like that. Now I will take a quick breather just to see if we have any questions so far. I see there is nothing popping up right now. So then I would continue. So the Scenario Explorer, we have a user management system that works across all scenario explorers. There was some confusion, I think, with signing up, especially with users who already have an account. If you already have an account, I would highly recommend that you don't create a new one. The reason is that once you create a second or a third one, it becomes quite complicated for us to know which one is your current one. If you've switched jobs or affiliations and now you no longer have access to the email address that you originally used to create the account, we can absolutely change that for you. So you just write us a quick email, you tell us your account, and then we can sort of unlock it again for you, if you will. One important point is that for project internal scenario explorers, you will need a user. And this is because during the kind of the internal phase of a project, we don't want to have the public to have access to our data yet, because it's it's all preliminary and we don't know if it might contain errors or certain things. So what this means is that just because you have an account does not mean that you can log in to the Scenario Explorer that is associated with your project. In order to do that, you need to take your login name, very important, your login name, not your email, and you will need to send that login name to the project coordinator. Project coordinator then typically gets in touch with us, and then we give you access. But to summarize, again, you only need one account. Yeah, continuing here, this is kind of the typical workflow that you would have in the Scenario Explorer. So if you will just give me a second. So the first thing that you will need to do now that you have registered yourself as the user is you would register your model. So as you register your model, we have different processing options available. So once you upload your data to the Scenario Explorer, there's a processing pipeline that runs, and we need to configure that so that we correctly treat your results. You would control these processing options through what we call a model mapping. And we'll explain what that is in a minute. And then once you have registered your model, you can upload the data. I will quickly talk to you what actually is happening in the backend, just to give you a bit of a better idea. We will then talk about the allowed values that are being validated as part of the upload. This is also known as the data template. We will discuss the notion of region aggregation, and then some common issues and kind of troubleshooting that you can perform yourself. And also some cases where you would need to contact the project coordinator or myself or my colleague David. Now, firstly, for model registration, just to get out some confusion, there has been some confusion about what we understand by a model name. And so a model name in our understanding is the combination of the name of the model and the version number. Perhaps the better term would be upload name, or like the name under which it is uploaded. The difference being that your model is, of course, ultimately computer code, and you are working on your model, so you are consistently making improvements. So this means that if you have modeling results from the beginning of a study, then by the end of the study, you will maybe have improved your model. You might even have a new release. And so then you want to be able to differentiate these two releases. And so that's why we kind of force you to use a version number. Where this also comes into play is once you are no longer just looking at one project, but when you are looking across projects, let's say the IPCC releases, let's say the teams that have already participated in AR5, SR15, AR6, and are now thinking of participating in the future, perhaps for AR7, it would be a bit strange to see just the model name over all of these years when you have no idea actually how much change has been in there. Now, the next thing that we need to talk about is aggregation and renaming. This has to do with the regional resolution of your model. First things first, if your model only reports countries, so a complete country as a region, and if all of these names fall within the ISO 3166, so this list of countries, this yeah, federally by the International Organization for Standardization, this list here, then you don't need to do any kind of aggregation, and you also don't need to do any kind of renaming. If you have, let's say, a global model, and this global model has regions such as Asia Pacific, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and so on and so forth, then you will probably need to do some aggregation and renaming. And as I know that this is a common cause for confusion, I will walk you through the template that is linked here. So let me just quickly open this, the model registration template, which is what you would fill out when you register your model. So here you would put your model, including the version number. So let's just, for the sake of the presentation here, let's just call it my model version 2.1. Documentation is also very important because it gives us the opportunity to present that to the users. And so then the users could look into some of the underlying assumptions of your model. This here is probably the most important sheet in this Excel, and it defines both the renaming and the aggregation. So to understand what that is, let's take this first example with the message model. So the message model natively reports a region that they call R11_AFR. Now, to the uninitiated, this doesn't mean very much. If you have been part of this modeling community for a while, you would probably guess that AFR probably stands for Africa. But what you might not know is that in the message case, this region is called Sub-Saharan Africa. Now you see here that we have also prefixed this region with the model name. The reason for that is that a lot of these region definitions are kind of ambiguous, or at least not set in stone. To take the example, if we have a model that reports, we have two models that report a region that they call Western Europe, it might not be as clear-cut as you think which countries are part of Western Europe. You can do historical arguing, you can do based on geography, but point of the story is that you only really know what is part of a region if you have the associated model name. So that's why we adopted this kind of standard where we put the model name, then the pipe character, and then the longer name for the region. So what happens as part of the submission process is we take a look at these native regions, so at the regions that you from your model report, and we rename them. We rename them according to the pattern of your model name, pipe, and then a longer kind of intuitively understandable name. In a publication, we would then have links somewhere or a big table to actually map what this region, what exactly the countries are that are contained in this region. This is the renaming part, and then here we have the R5 column. So R5 is in the standard IPCC nomenclature. This is the 5/6 if you include the other region parts that the world is divided into, and this we use for comparison. So the example that I always like to give is, let's say you have two models. One of them reports Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and the other one reports Northern Europe and Southern Europe. Let's say you want to compare the results. Now this is tricky because of course they have different regional resolutions. Now, the solution to that is you define a big region that in this case you would call Europe. And then for the first model, you add up Western and Eastern Europe. And then for the second model, you add up Northern and Southern Europe. And so now all of a sudden you've created a new region called Europe. And then you can compare your results. And this is what we have with the R5 or R10 region mapping, which is where you would simply list all of the regions of your model and how they would map onto, in this case, the R5. Again, for the national modeling study, this is perhaps not relevant, as the name suggests, national. So you're probably have big international regions that you use to compare your results, but I still wanted to mention it for EUCD and probably most importantly for COMITTED. There is another sheet here, which is the region country mapping, which is if this was the mapping on how your country's your model's native region maps onto these bigger comparison regions. This one is kind of the inverse of that. So this shows you how your model's native region, how this is split up into individual countries. So here in this case, part of the R11 AFR region is the country Egypt. Technically, this is not required for the model mapping, but it is still highly recommended that you fill this out if you have such regions that apply for your model, because then the users can know what exactly is contained in your regions. Finally, here you have a list of the users. You would need to provide your name, email, the IASA manager username. So this is from the Scenario Explorer user system, and then optionally your GitHub username. Why this is relevant, we will see shortly. Importantly, yeah, you provide the whole team here so that I can give you all, or that we as the team can give you the required permissions. Coming back to the topic of model registration, this is the live walkthrough. The next thing we need to talk about is the project workflow. So project workflow is a GitHub repository that is specific to each project. And if I open this now, this is I need to open this in a different browser window. So I will open it here. And here you can see the folder for model mappings. So just to kind of illustrate to you what we do, we receive your model mapping as an Excel file and we convert it to a YAML file. The advantage for that is that YAML is a plain text format, so it's it plays very nicely with version control systems. In this case here, Git. Coming to this folder here called definitions. So definitions is another very important concept, and this pertains to the concept of standardization. So we have learned over the years that in order to compare model results, we need to standardize across the different IAMC dimensions. So mainly what we need to do is we need to standardize across the region, the scenario, and the variable dimension. And so for this, we have these lists, sometimes called variable templates, sometimes called modeling templates. In this case here, they are represented as YAML files, but also if you're part of the national modeling study, you will see that Saritha has sent around an Excel variable template that also contains values for regions and scenarios. And so these YAML files contain all of the allowed values that, in this case, the region dimension is allowed to take on. In the past, we have been a little bit more lenient. So in the past, we've had it where we've had a list of allowed values, and if you were outside, you would get a little warning, but we would still accept your upload. And then I think starting with AR6, we realized that this is an absolute recipe for disaster. The reason for that is that if you allow arbitrary values in there, you will very quickly lose the ability to compare modeling results, because each models might mean the same thing, but they would call things slightly differently. So you might mean the same region, but you write it slightly differently or something like that. So this causes such a headache for comparison that we have opted to do it the other way around. So we are intentionally overly strict, so that by design, all of the modeling results in terms of the language that they use, the language being the names for the scenarios, the names for the regions, and the variable and unit combinations, that all of these are aligned. And this greatly aids in the in the vetting process. One thing that's also very important in these definition folders here, in the variable part, I see that here this is actually empty because we're importing from external dimensions, but I can open, and this is just as valid. The Excel version is that not only does every variable have a description, but perhaps almost more importantly, every variable has an associated unit. So this means that not only are you only allowed to report what's within this list, but you have a unit that you need to do this in. And this is again the same reason for that as mentioned previously, is that you need to align your modeling results. And if you allow for arbitrary units, very quickly you can come into a situation where you are just looking at the numbers of two models, and they might be wildly different, but they actually might mean the same thing, because one could be in, if we're talking about a unit of energy, one could be in exajoule, the other could be in megaton of oil equivalent or something like this. Both two perfectly valid units, but you need to settle on one unit so that you can compare your results. Coming back here to my presentation. So if you would like to add your model mapping, you can either do that with the before mentioned Excel sheet. Again, if you have a model that only reports a single country, then you don't need to do that at all. You just send us your usernames and the model name and the version. If you would like to have additional variables in there, you could either get in contact with the organizer of the study, in this case for the national modeling study, that would be Saritha, or you can open a pull request directly into this GitHub repository if you're familiar with the associated GitHub terminology in there. Data templates is what I just showed. I have listed here all of the three workflow repositories that are applicable for the projects today. One of the things that is entirely optional, but at least to me has proven quite useful, are using these GitHub repositories also for discussions. They can be quite nice because you can attach files, you can have plots nicely rendered, you can easily pull in multiple people, and so on and so forth. To me, it's a lot nicer and cleaner than email. But this is completely up to you how you organize your communication in that. Now that we have covered how to get your username registered, how to get your model registered, and then how to conform to the data template, we shall try and actually upload our data. For this, I have a couple of test data cases, and I have mostly focused on the various different ways in which the uploads can go wrong, because this is perhaps more illustrative than having an upload that goes perfectly well. So now I just need to consult my password manager here and log in. Now you will see that in the top right corner, there is your username. And then when you open your username, the second one is the uploads menu. So now for the uploads menu, you will click on this plus here, and you will select the time series data option. It's important, you need to select this one. As you just saw, the process file upon upload option was automatically checked as I selected this. Leave this in. You must leave this in, because if you don't, it is treated from the Scenario Explorer just as a file, and the content of your data is not actually read. So if you want to have your data inside the Scenario Explorer, you need to leave this on. The description is definitely where you can do your future self a huge favor by providing a short and nicely descriptive couple of words, so that you know actually what you did and what you uploaded there. I will now quickly start 3 different uploads with 3 different failure scenarios just to illustrate that to you. One important thing is that actually, as your Scenario Explorer user account is linked to an email address, we have a system by which once an upload has started processing, then we will send you an email that it's running, and then once it's finished, we also send you an email. Very important to at least quickly check the second of that email, which is when the upload was confirmed to have concluded, because uploads can fail. The uploads here are not that you do this, you just upload it and then set it and forget it. You need to actually check whether or not your data made it into the database. Perhaps the best example here to illustrate my point is this one. So I have modeling results for 2 different regions. One is the OECD region that we already looked at before in the model mapping, and the other one is a made-up region that I call region 1. So this region is not in our data template, so therefore the upload will fail. Now you could look at this and say, well, line number 3, this is perfectly valid, right? This conforms to the data template and everything else. So I could just not upload this one. And then as part of the processing, this one can still make it to the database. We initially tried that, and again, it's a recipe for disaster, because then the notion of whether or not your upload was successful becomes ambiguous, because then the question is, well, is your upload only successful if everything made it in, or if parts of your data made it in? And then you would always need to check what actually made it in. So we opted for the more simple, in a sense, almost more brutal approach, that data is only accepted as an upload if everything is correct. So you could have a million lines of modeling results here. If you have one faulty line with one faulty character, we reject the entire upload. Again, this might sound overly harsh, but it just has proven to us over the last couple of years that this is the only way to do this in a timely manner, because otherwise you just kind of step over and omit taking care of these tiny little mistakes here and there. And then when it's time to publish your hard-earned results, you realize that, okay, there's this missing, there's that missing. So we are intentionally being as strict as possible. But yeah, you have to trust us that we have tried the alternative, and this is the way to go. So now we can actually take a look. So you see that I have the status here. Unfortunately, this doesn't automatically refresh, so we need to scroll up and click on this refresh icon here, and you see that the first upload has started to process. I can try and hit that button again just to see once it's finished. And once it is, then we can check about the status. So you will see here that from previous uploads, there are some red ones. So this is all uploads where we had some kind of a mistake. Once again, to make the point, the word data template is perhaps a little bit misleading, because template to me can mean something almost like a form where you get something and then you fill something in and then you have your data. And we have sent out the data template, and I have seen a lot of uploads where you have taken this template, you have added your data, and then you have uploaded it. That will not work. What you need to do, as I said in the beginning, you will need to upload your data in this format and in this format only, meaning one sheet, all of your results in there. You need all of the 5 index columns. You also need no additional columns. You're not allowed additional columns. And then time-wise, you are allowed to choose your annual resolution. You're allowed to choose, does your model report every year, every 2 years, every 5 years, so on and so forth. But very importantly, the term variable template, the template part does not mean that you take your data and you add it to that Excel sheet. You take a look at the template, you see all of the values that are allowed, and then from that you create a fresh Excel sheet where you have your modeling results and then you upload those. So let's come back here. I see that now all of the uploads have now failed. This is as expected because I intentionally made them so. Here, the error that we have is that the following items are not defined in the region code list. Region 1, we don't know region 1. That's expected. The second one is the unknown variable. So this is also to illustrate what happens if you try to submit a variable that's not known. I have the test data here that I can show you here. So I have here invented a variable that I called some variable. And since it's not part of our data template, yeah, it was rejected. Perhaps the most interesting error is this one here, which is where we have the wrong unit. So here, we take a look at the wrong unit here. Here we have the primary energy variable, and we have reported it in gigawatt hours. We take a look at the National Modeling Scenarios Forum template, and we take a look for primary energy. We have it here. We see that primary energy, by definition, needs to be reported in exajoule per year. Doesn't mean that exajoule is the best or the only unit, of course, but it's just the unit that we have chosen to kind of standardize our results. So in this case, what you would need to do to resolve it is you would need to perform the conversion from exajoule per year, from gigawatt hours per year to exajoule per year. Jumping back to the presentation, to kind of succinctly summarize this again, one thing that I've also seen, this is very important, the error message of user X does not have permission to upload the model. Sometimes this can be because the model name that we gave you the permissions for, so permissions to upload are granted on a model by model basis, is slightly different than what you uploaded. So you always need to see this from the perspective of the computer. The computer cannot sort of intelligently interpolate. So for you, Model 2 and Model 2.0 might be the same thing. For the computer, it's not. So you need to keep exactly to that. The checkbox process file upon upload, that one you need to just keep checked. And of course, for future reference, a meaningful description goes a long way. Very important, Scenario Explorer uploads are not set it and forget it. You need to come back to and either look at your emails or come back to the Scenario Explorer frontend. Processing typically takes between a couple of seconds and a couple of minutes, depending on how big your data set is, but you need to come back and verify. Ideally, even if the status is green, you still come back and check the logs just to see that there were no warnings in there. The logs you check by going, let me actually make this a little bit bigger so it's nicer to see. There's a button here that says, if I mouse over, it should tell me open job logs. It doesn't right now, but then you get here to this interface, and then here you have the error that we got. Yeah, coming back to the presentation, to the troubleshooting guide. So now I've identified a couple of the common issues that we've seen. Again, if you have an unknown scenario, variable, or region, you can do one of three things to remedy this. Either it's wrongly in there and it should not be uploaded, in which case you remove it, or something that means the same thing is already in the data, in the data template, so you would rename. For example, you model a country called USA. Meanwhile, in the data template, there is a region called United States of America. in this case, you rename USA to United States of America, and then you can re-upload. If there is something in your data that you, one, need to have in the database, and it's currently not in the list of allowed values, you would contact the project coordinator, and then they would get in touch with us, and so then we work out how we best add these values. Again, if you are comfortable with GitHub, we of course always welcome a direct pull request, and then you can tag us as the coordinators or the kind of the admin people behind the project to review, and then we can resolve this and add and expand the variable template. If you have a wrong unit, that's slightly more subtle. You need to perform a unit conversion in this case. Can be quite straightforward, can be in the terms of, let's say, monetary units with a year values attached can be a little bit more tricky. Missing model permission can have two common reasons. Either the model name is slightly off compared to what has been registered, or simply your model hasn't been registered, in which case a quick message to the project coordinators should resolve things. Now, before I come to the vetting part, I would again have a quick sip of water and take a look at the questions.
I think mostly Oliver and I are answering the questions, Philip, but then maybe a few set of general questions. One was initially, I think, asked by Lewis on sending a URL of the PPT. So maybe we can share the PPT after the presentation.
Yeah, sure.
I can do that. The other question was, I think uploading the single sheet of model data. So at one time, they just have one scenario, and then maybe the next time they add the scenario and then upload it again. So that also is possible, I think.
I didn't quite follow that.
So it's basically, they said that if they have a scenario output they are working on, so they would first upload data for only one scenario, and then update the sheet later with the second scenario output.
Yeah, that certainly works.
That's fine.
That certainly works. Of course, you would need to re-upload every time, right?
Yeah, maybe just to add like slight clarification to this, right? So, in principle, if every time you upload a set of results in the form of a scenario, then internally the Scenario Explorer, the database in the background versions this. Yeah, so the first time you upload your BAU scenario, for example, it will be stored and versioned under version number 1. Yeah. If you then have a second upload and you again upload your BAU scenario, but this time in addition you add a second scenario in there, then what happens is that the BAU scenario is uploaded and stored as version number 2 because you've already had a previous upload, whereas your alternative scenario is still under version 1. Now this happens within the Scenario Explorer. You don't actually see this happening. There are options where you can go into advanced settings and then you can see the actual versions. But I think I also mentioned this in the comments that you cannot supplement scenario data. So that means if you forget to upload a set of variables in your first upload, you can't add these via a second separate upload without including the full data set. So every time you make an upload, your scenario data is versioned internally. Yeah, that means you always need to have a complete upload of all the information for a scenario.
Okay. And then there's one on the subnational or spot area. So in our, I think it's Miguel Chang, they say that in their model, native regions are on spot area levels rather than NUT3. Should this be reported, or aggregated data should be reported at national level?
Yeah, this is a good question. I don't quite know what spot area level means, I have to
think
say.
it's electricity spot areas, but this is just a guess.
Okay. So yeah, I guess this depends on what is the important part that you want to convey with your model. If the most important thing is really to get this quite fine resolution, then you will need to give every region that you report a name, and you would need to fill out the model registration template where you you tell us what these regions are called, and then we will add them accordingly. In terms of aggregation, if you can perform the aggregation on your side, this is okay. If you would rather us have to perform the aggregation, this is also totally fine. Of course, if you have worked with aggregation before, you know that it's not always as easy as adding two numbers, right? Let's say you have two sub-regions of a bigger region, and they both have, just to pick an example, 50% unemployment rate. Combined, they don't have 100% employment rate, right? So you would need to do a weighted average in this case. So in case your the variables that you report carry such intricacies, sometimes it's the safer way if you calculate the aggregations on your side as well. So in this case, you would probably provide spot level data as well as completely aggregated data on country level. I hope that that this clarification helps.
Yeah. And then I think maybe just one final question before you go to the scenario vetting. For national teams, do they mention the country name in region column or overall region, which engulfs the modeling country?
Yeah, this is a good one, and I guess the confusion comes from the somewhat ambiguous notion of a region, and this is chosen in particular, this name, because a region can be any size, right? A region can be super small. It can be a tiny part of a country, but it can also be a group of countries. So that's why we chose that, and it means simply the geographic part for which your time series applies. So if you're modeling a country, you put the country there.
Okay. And there's one last question. I think maybe Oliver or you can answer, and then maybe from a national study, I can just add on. Did the template evolve between the data required for global modeling and the data required for national modeling, or it is based on the global modeling reporting?
Yeah, sure. So for this one, before I go into this question, this might be a subtlety, but the data template, it's for what's allowed. It's not for what's required, right? Those are two separate questions. The question of what's allowed is sort of you are to choose from a pool of all of these variables. You can choose which ones you want to report. Required is different, of course, because required, at least in the way that I would understand it, is that if you don't provide the list of these variables, then your upload will be rejected. The latter we do not do. So we try to be as inclusive as possible. So therefore, we briefly discussed putting a minimum set of variables that you need to report, but we then decided against it. So in short, report as much as you can within the template, but at the same time, there's no minimum requirement. Now, to actually answer your question, it is definitely the origin of the template is from the global modeling community. And it wasn't specifically tweaked now for the country modeling. That being said, a lot of the variables could still apply, right? Something like employment, unemployment, population, GDP, energy consumption. These are notions. These are variables that are sort of scale independent, right? You could have a figure of a population within a town, within a region, within a country, or within like a super part of the earth. So in that sense, I think to precisely answer your question, it is from a global modeling perspective and view, but it should be applicable as well to country models. There can, of course, be exceptions, in which case there's definitely the possibility to extend the data template. But as we already discussed in the morning session, maybe Saritha, you can come in here as well. This is not intended for the first round of submissions for the national modeling studies.
Yeah. So just to add on what Philip just said, and this is for Jan, actually the data template is evolving in this study because we are now getting to know some of the variables which the national modeling teams are addressing and saying that they would want this variable to be added. So there is a discussion and we are kind of setting a guideline on how to add this. It can be done in an ad hoc manner for the study, but still, at least for the first round, because we want to at least have a minimum set of variables to start the vetting process, to have the teams online on the IIASA Scenario Explorer. Right now, we just are sticking to the scenario template, but we can add the variables related to the national modeling based on if all the teams in the study are able to basically give this extra set of variables that you may be suggesting. So it's still a process. So for the first round, we are sticking to the scenario variable list that has been shared with everyone. Thanks.
Yeah, I might want just add two comments here. The first is that the variable template as such, I mean, it's actually agnostic to the regional resolution, so it doesn't really matter what if it's national or global. Especially on the emission side, for example, a lot has been structured around the IPCC definitions, right? So that's where it's actually important, is to make sure that the definitions are thoroughly aligned with what we are comparing. A lot of the others have been aligned, for example, with IEA in terms of the energy definition. So the usual strategy in any of these intercomparison works is that you actually try to start off with a rather reduced template, so that, as Saritha said, that so you get everyone on board, and also you need to remember that the more information you provide, the more you need to vet, right? So essentially, it's important to provide the data in form of more or less minimum requirements and say these are the minimum amount of data, and as the study evolves, then you might want to extend in order to provide more detailed information to extend the analysis, right? But in you know, once you go and have data for a lot of the different models, then having less is oftentimes better than having more, and extending this as required at a steady pace, that is the better way forward, as opposed to reporting everything that your model has internally.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. Just wrapping up the question. There was one that I that I saw here that just vanished that I wanted to. Yes, exactly. So for model registration, we're working on that. Please just understand that this is 80 plus teams, and so we might be a little bit behind, but we haven't forgotten about your models. There's one more open question. I think, Saritha, this one is for you for adding scenarios outside of the current scope.
Yeah, similarly, as Oliver and Philip has said, right now we are sticking to 3 scenarios for the study. We'll see how all the teams have submitted, because some teams cannot submit more than 1 scenario, and there are teams who would want to submit like 6 or 7 scenarios. So for the first, we want at least 2 scenarios per team to be submitted, and then based on how the first round goes, we can basically open up on the number of scenarios that can be submitted. So hopefully that answers your question. Thanks.
Perfect. There's one more that I would like to answer, and then we have 25 minutes to cover the notion of vetting. There was one that was answered from Oliver, but I think it perhaps could have been a misunderstanding from Bryce McCall about the version number being a date. So Oliver explained this for the model scenario combinations that the database automatically assigns. It could also be seen as the version of the model, and we definitely have models that have this kind of a more like a date versioning. What I would advise is to stick to yearly releases. Otherwise, the model name would change a little bit too often, and then you would get a huge amount of models. However, at least then you would have a clean lineage. So if you would like to implement this, you can get in touch. I will put my email in the answer, and then we can discuss how to implement that most efficiently. In case you were referring to the model question, the model version. Okay, so now we can go to the scenario vetting part. Just for the record, this is most important now for the participants from the EUCD project as well as the COMITTED project, because for the vetting of the national scenarios, this will be done by the study organizers, by kind of an expert panel, but it should still be a good idea to kind of get an idea of how you can take a look at data, if you will. So I will show you on how to create a workspace. So first we take a look at the Scenario Explorer frontend, and then how you can do it in an automated way through code. So switching over again to the NGFS Explorer, I will now log out as a guest, and I will log in with my username. The reason why you might want to log in a public Scenario Explorer where you technically don't need a username, why you might want to still do that, was because then you can save your workspaces. So if we take a look, create a new workspace, we create a new time series panel, and then we go to the list, and in the list we have, let's say we want to look at the net zero scenario for GChem, and we want to compare that with the net zero scenario for message. Now these are 2 models and 1 scenario each. We want to look at the world region, and let's see what kind of an energy demand, or let's see what kind of a climate outcome this would be. So we take a look at the 50th percentile of MAGIC is the climate model that we're using for the surface temperature. And then we might want to take a look at the emissions that are kind of projected that would be required for this temperature target. We can take a look here, and we see that actually for the net zero scenario, we will have sort of a broad peak warming period between, say, 2040 and 2060, and then things will slowly start to relax again. And as we can imagine, the emissions are required to be reduced quite dramatically. In the case of GCAM, we would even have strong negative emissions. Just to illustrate what you can do with this workspace now, if we click on these three bars here and we edit the workspace, we can first give it a name. So we can give it something like GCAM message net zero comparison. We can give it a description. Here we compare the carbon emissions and temperature curves for two models for the net zero scenario. And then we can save it here. This is the save button, this little cloud icon here. And then as we go down here, we see that there's three visibility options. Public basically means that everyone is able to see the scenario, this workspace. And unlisted means that you now have a secret link that you can share with your colleagues, with your collaborators, so that they can then see the workspace that you've done. And this can be quite handy when you are when you want to compare results, but you don't want to publicly share that with everyone yet, but just maybe keep it team internal or something. One very important button is this one up here as you perform a vetting process. This one, somehow in my Firefox currently the mouse over is not working. I apologize for that, but this is the update to latest version. So as Oliver has already alluded to, we have this versioning logic that automatically, if you upload a model scenario combination that's already in the database, the data is overwritten and the new version is created. If you have a plot already that references these data, you would need to actively update it to the latest version. So if you have, let's say you have a graph that illustrates perhaps a problem or an inconsistency or some feature of a model that should be addressed in a future version, someone uploads a future version, then you would click this button and upload it to that version just to see if the feature has been resolved. Then you can choose for your plots from a couple of different options. Here we have the line charts, which for these trajectories of temperature and emissions can be quite nice, but perhaps you would want to present it as a bar chart. We have this option, or as a table here. You could also download your data, so you can download the data here with this button to kind of dive into them more deeply on your local machine, on your desktop, using, again, Excel, R, Python, or whatever you like. So we then would come to the option of using the PYAM package. So I will again increase my screen size a little bit so that it's easier to see. So we have Python running here. We have Python 3.11, I believe. We have imported PYAM, and then just to kind of recreate this plot, we are taking a look at the NGFS phase 4. The function is called read-IASA. This is all nicely explained in the PYAM documentation. We read from NGFS phase 4. We read for the models message and GCAM. We read the two variables, emissions CO2, as well as the 50th percentile of the global warming. We do this for the world region and for the net zero scenario. We now run this. This will take a little while, where it would connect to the scenario explorer, register with my username, and then now here we have the curves for the CO2 emissions, and we can see also here data is the same as in the scenario explorer, because we have the negative emissions here for GCAM. Temperature I have excluded to plot now, but I could also remove this filter here, and then we would have the temperature as well. What's also nice is that in the next step, I can then do to Excel. Again, all of this is documented. And then you can save the data that you've just downloaded, so to do further analysis. Now, the combination of these two tools, sort of the scenario explorer to get a quick first look and perhaps detect any model anomalies or something like that, and then using the Python interface to download the data and really dig into them more deeply and perform statistical analysis or any other kind of vetting protocol that you agree with as a consortium, this can be a really nice and automated way how to do that and how to create for a different project. For example, we've created kind of a traffic light system. Some colleagues have done that looks at a lot of different indicators for each scenario, and then we can that helps us more quickly identify where there might be some issues with the models. So that would be it from my side. Perhaps Oliver or Saritha would like to come in with some more thoughts on the vetting process. Otherwise, we can see if there's any more questions from the audience.
On my side, we have answered, I think, most of the questions, but the last one, I think, for additional scenarios and additional variable list, which are not there, please email me, because we are actually gathering all the variables across models that the teams would like to be added, like they wanted to be added, and we'll go through a process, hopefully, and try to add as many scenario variables as possible in the study. For the vetting process, we are still doing the first round of vetting process with I think there are around 15 modeling teams which have submitted. There were certain problems when they were submitting their scenarios. So I think whoever have submitted the scenario successfully, the first round of vetting is going on internally. So for the national study, we'll have an internal vetting process, and we'll be informing the team if we are facing any issues, and we'll inform the team once the scenarios have been vetted on our end. However, I think it's in COMITTED and EUCD, I think it's a more open process. I'm not pretty sure. Okay, but other than that, if we have about, I think, 10, 12 minutes. So if participants have questions, if not, I can.
Yeah, one more point that I want to make is for all the teams that have already submitted, please make sure to check the Scenario Explorer and check the status of your upload. From what I've seen, there is very few that were actually successful. So please make sure that you check and that you read the error message, and then if it's outside of the couple of examples that are easy to fix that I showed, please just get in touch, and we'll make sure to do our best to resolve them. But again, I want to drive home the point that the uploads to the Scenario Explorer are not set it and forget it. They are not done as soon as the window for the upload closes. You need to verify that the upload was successful, because if it wasn't successful, there is none of your data in the database, because we've had some confusion about that. So if there's no further questions other than that, I want to thank you very much for attending. I want to thank you for the participation, for all of the questions. This was again a very nice interactive session. I hope that we could clear up some of the confusion, and then for any remaining questions, we're of course always available bilaterally via email. And then I will also send the slides to Saritha, and she will then make sure to circulate them afterwards. So yeah, thank you from my side.
Yeah. So I think if there are no further questions, In case you have any questions about registrations, please get back to me. If you have not received any confirmation of your model registration, please get back to me. Other than that, I hope that this session was helpful for everyone. And I think the recording also would be available online. We'll inform you once the recording it will be available. And yeah, thank you so much for taking out time. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, David. Thank you, Oliver, for taking out time to address all the questions and for the presentation, overall presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much as well for organizing it. Yeah.
So.